morning and welcome to the Grace Hour broadcast, brought to you every Sunday morning at this time by the Missionary Church Association in Jamaica. I'm your host, Nigel Wilkinson. This morning we have with us once again Reverend Teddy Jones, Chairman of the Missionary Church Association in Jamaica, as well as Pastor of the Grace Missionary Church. As always, we invite you to write to us for comment or counsel. Our email address is mcaj@cwjamaica.com. This morning's broadcast is sponsored by the Tower Hill Missionary Church, located at 159 Olympic Way, Kingston 11. The pastor, Reverend Renard White, and the congregation invite you to worship with them in their morning service today at 10. Do stay with us. In a moment, we bring you this morning's message.
Before I spoke a word, you were singing over me. And you have been so, so good to me. Yes, you have, yes, you have. For I took a breath, you breathed your life in me. Yeah. And you have been so, so kind. Come on, every voice lift it all. And oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. And oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. And I couldn't earn it, and I don't deserve it. Still, you give yourself away. And oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God.
The stranglehold that mammon appears to have over humans and the ways in which it worms its way into the faith community are of such gravity that we detain ourselves another week on the subject. Let's read again from St. John chapter 2 from verse 13. When it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple courts, he found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and others sitting at tables exchanging money. So he made a whip out of cords and drove all from the temple courts, both sheep and cattle. He scattered the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. To those who sold doves, he said, "Get these out of here. Stop turning my Father's house into a market." His disciples remembered that it is written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." We indicated last week that the money changers and the sellers of sheep and cattle and doves were providing a legitimate service, but in an illegitimate manner and place. Further examples of faith communities placing greater emphasis on the acquisition of money over the provision of space and opportunity for prayer exist. The practice of spending a large chunk of time in a corporate worship service using psychological manipulation to twist people into giving large sums of money towards a building project deserves to be called into question. There are times when this is the main item on the program that day. Where there is a careful collective commitment to prayer for the provision of the needs of the faith community, there would be no need for the mental manipulation, which visitors and non-members are finding rather repulsive. Instead, persons will be led by the Spirit of God to donate amounts that God will provide. It is interesting to note that invariably these large fundraisers tend to be for the erection of expansive physical structures or the addition of creature comforts to the existing plant. Not that anything is wrong necessarily with that, but one hardly hears of large sums being raised towards humanitarian relief in the community or towards scholarships for struggling students of the church and community, for example. The efforts to acquire more money seems to quite often have an insular and self-aggrandizing objective behind it. There is another interesting observation arising from John's account. Whereas in Matthew, Mark, and Luke's account of the story, the merchants are specifically mentioned as being driven out along with their merchandise, John writes with a focus on the merchandise being displaced, but not the merchandisers. This is actually what John says. Let's hear it again. In the temple courts, he found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and others sitting at tables exchanging money. So he made a whip out of cords and drove all from the temple courts, both sheep and cattle. He scattered the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. Contrast that with what the synoptic writers say. Take Luke 21:45 for example. And he entered the temple and began to drive out those who sold, saying to them, what am I driving at? Why would John focus on the animals and the inanimate coins and not mention the humans? I want to believe that John's focus was on the place of prayer, the priority of prayer as a central activity in the life of the church, by and for the people. We must therefore seek to keep people in that place, not drive them out. It is the objects that distract and disorient people that must be driven out while we seek to keep people in the place of prayer. This actually fits in with the next observation, which is implied in the text. The fact is that in their pursuit of mammon, the very space of the merchandising was the space that was set aside for the worship of persons from the nations in particular. The temple space was meant to be an inclusive space. Jesus reminded them that this was Yahweh's intent. His zeal was to protect that objective. We must therefore be careful to ensure that we are not keeping people away from the place of prayer, that we are not driving out those who show up, that our fascination with mammon is not a turn-off, that we do not exploit anyone who seeks solace in the place of prayer. We must be intentional in promoting our venues as spaces that are available to strangers and non-members, as opposed to the kind of members-only air that permeates many of our churches. Mammon's elevation in the house of his father bothered Jesus to the extent that it did, because the paraphernalia of mammon and the noise and crowd associated with it occupied the space where healing and deliverance should be taking place. Notice that in Matthew's record of the incident, he states, and the blind and the lame came to him in the temple, and he healed them. That's Matthew 21, verse 14. Immediately after the clearing of the temple space, the blind and the lame were led and brought to Jesus. It is an absolute disaster when we erect barriers of whatever nature, but especially of the mammonic kind, that prevent those who are incapacitated from coming to us to have God's grace ministered unto them. God's power is not for sale. Once we begin to put a price on prayers for healing and trinkets for deliverance, we automatically exclude those who are not able to afford to put bread on their table, nor to get a specialist doctor. This selling of healing and deliverance is not always direct. You see, there is a subtle way in which the teaching of seed sowing, for example, has also been twisted and hijacked by those who are flirting with mammon. The poor are crowded out because there is a larger seed required to be sown if their medical complication is particularly serious. The final observation has to do with the direction of Jesus' zeal for his Father's house. It was directed at preserving the equal access and egress by all to the centrality of prayers unto God. It has been my observation that there are some among us who have a lot of zeal for the church building and property, above zeal for those who should be using it. The building and the property become more important than people. So a dirty and disheveled man, for example, will be kept on the outside because he will dirty the seats. Boys who have nowhere else in the community to play are shouted off the church's parking lot because they may damage the windows. Let no one among us pretend to be like Jesus with zeal, if this is how that zeal is going to be focused.
Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. And oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. And I couldn't earn it, and I don't deserve it. Still, you give yourself away. And oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God.
Once again, it is our prayer that you are challenged by this morning's message delivered by Reverend Teddy Jones. For comment or counsel, please email us at mcaj@cwjamaica.com. Before we go, we have some announcements to share with you. The Hepzibah Missionary Church, Coley Mountain, Manchester, invites you to their annual Harvest Thanksgiving service to be held this afternoon, commencing at 4. The Eltham Missionary Church invites all to their evangelistic community outreach to be held under the theme Jesus Saves and Transforms, commencing today at 9 a.m. The speaker will be Pastor Ricardo Piper, and then this evening at 6:30, the speaker will be Pastor Kenroy Waldo. The venue will be at the corner of Flintstone and Limestone Close, Eltham, Phase 2. The Women's Ministry of the Miketown Missionary Church, Miketown, Manchester, invites you to their annual rally to be held on Good Friday, April 19, commencing at 5 p.m. Refreshments will be on sale. The Portmore Missionary Church, Sector F, Edgewater, Portmore St. Catherine, invites you to share in their Easter reflection, Journey to the Cross, Sunday, April 15 through to Thursday, April 18, 7 o'clock each evening. The speaker will be Reverend Dr. David Corbin, President of the Caribbean Graduate School of Theology. And the Missionary Church Association in Jamaica invites all to their 70th annual convention to be held under the theme Repositioning the Church for Community Transformation at the Kendall Camp and Conference Centre, Shooters Hill in Manchester on Sunday, April 28. The service begins at 9, and the speaker will be Bishop Charles Matheka Kinyanju, President of World Partners International and President of the Missionary Churches of Kenya. Thanks once again to the Tower Hill Missionary Church, located at 159 Olympic Way, Kingston 11, for sponsoring this morning's broadcast. The pastor, Reverend Ronald White, and the congregation invite you to worship with them in their morning service today, commencing at 9. The Great Story is brought to you by the Missionary Church Association in Jamaica. I'm Nigel Wilkinson, wishing for you God's richest blessings for the coming week.
And I couldn't earn it, and I don't deserve